Aditya Nag is Business Development Manager for Wearables and Fashion at Intel Corporation. Would you just like to give us an overview of what Intel is doing in wearables and what the interest is in wearables for Intel?
Yeah, you know, I think Intel is definitely a company, obviously, that's very interested in technology. And wearables, just like many other areas like cloud computing and Internet of Things, is going to be one of the next big spaces to watch. As I think Steve had mentioned, you know, people are forecasting 50 billion connected devices in the next few years. And as Intel, we are really about enabling entrepreneurs, technologists, other companies to really build off our platforms, both from a hardware and solutions perspective. So we're really excited to be a part of this space.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Great to have you here. Next panelist is Jonathan Charles. He's a member of the venture capital team at Samsung Catalyst Fund.
We look at the world as, on the digital health side, wearables would be a subset of that. And we look at sensors, algorithms, so the components that Steve was talking about. The corporate venture people are interested in components because we'd like to see those potentially go into our Samsung platforms. But on the digital health side, which connects back to wearables, I hope we also talk about digital health services, which is if you have all this data coming from your body and it goes up to the cloud, say, for example, what do you do with that data? It should be delivering some kind of insight, and if you have insight and you connect it to the massive US healthcare system, maybe you can monetize.
Hold that thought. Services is going to be a big topic of discussion, not only this morning, but in general when we talk about wearables.
Yeah.
So last up we have Justin Butler, who's VP of Commercial Development at Misfit, and that's really all I know about Justin, so he's going to have to introduce himself.
Sure.
Welcome, Justin.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much. Hey guys. Yeah, so I lead commercial development at Misfit, and at Misfit we are a consumer products company. You heard a little preview of us up here in the previous talk, but we make wearable devices, and we're also venturing into home automation, Internet of Things. We build sensors for all parts of your life to hopefully make it a lot better.
Thank you, Justin. And so to make the panel complete, I'm Werner Gertz. I'm Research Director with Gartner. We have 900 plus analysts who advise CIOs, CMOs, and IT professionals in the industry. I cover the consumer devices spectrum all the way from PCs, desktops, over to mobile phones, smartphones, down to wearable devices and IoT devices as well. Prior to coming to Gartner, I was with ARM, a semiconductor IP company that was prominently featured on one of the previous slides as well. And prior to that, many of you will know the company that I worked with prior for that. That's Wipro Technologies. I was in charge of the VLSI design services for Wipro Technologies. I had the opportunity to meet and work for them a few years ago. So let's get started. And I want to take another opportunity to use the term fashion and aesthetic appeal and Intel in the same sense. If you look around the room, who of us here, honestly, are really making a fashion statement? Can we competently talk about fashion here today? We're a bunch of engineers and entrepreneurs, right? What the heck do we know about fashion? So I'm going to have to ask the fashion expert here from Intel. How does fashion, how does aesthetic appeal fit into the spectrum of wearables, and why is fashion important?
Yeah, so I think if you look at wearable technology, there's sort of two parts to the equation. One part, which a lot of us are very familiar with, is the technology aspect, enabling certain features, certain capabilities. But the other part is that given that now we're thinking about putting this technology on our bodies, it is a much more intimate relationship with the individual than we've ever kind of had with technology before. Typically, technology has always been sort of at an arm's length. Now we're talking about it with our bodies on us 24/7. Typically, when we wear things, it's usually a medium of self-expression. You know, I wear this blazer because it says something about my taste or like what I like to wear. Somebody else might wear a shirt or a dress because it says something about them. So, for wearables to be truly successful, they need to be fashion forward. They need to be something people want to wear, want to have on their bodies, want to have people looking at 24 hours of the day. And so from our perspective, this is why we have made a lot of steps to partner with different players in the fashion industry, really to get their expertise from the design and aesthetic perspective while we bring the technology perspective.
And Intel has made some significant investments and has brought products out under the co-branded Intel name, like the Mica, like the Basis, for instance. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the Mica product is something...
Oh, it's Mica, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
It's something that's it's coming out this holiday and is really a luxury smart bracelet that we developed in partnership with Opening Ceremony. So Intel really came with the technology, Opening Ceremony brought the design aesthetic, and you know, we're targeting a very specific target customer, a woman who's an achiever, who wants to be connected, but yet at the same time wants to be fashionable. And you know, this is part of our way of showing the industry that it is possible to blend feature-rich technologies with excellent design aesthetic. And as a platform company, we're all about partnerships, and this is another example where we're doing something like that successfully.
Partnerships is an excellent segue to the next question that I was going to ask Jonathan, and that is partnerships and ecosystems. So a lot of wearables and a lot of smartphones get their momentum and get their use value through the ecosystem of applications and services that are involved. So where does that leave wearables? How important is the apps ecosystem, the platform ecosystem, such as Android Wear, for wearables going forward and for your constituents in your portfolio, your companies, and for the technology in general?
Yeah, I think when you think of apps and ecosystems, that's you know, that's where the big game's at. You can sell a device, hope you get good margins, competitors will come in, maybe you'll get cloned, it'll be a race to the bottom on margin and price, and you know, that starts getting to be a really tough business. But if you go to the apps and ecosystem side, margins are typically higher, you can get volume and distribution. If you're working with a big partner, could be Samsung, could be Apple, could be somebody else. And if you take it even further, it's one thing to sell an app to an end user, say a consumer. But if you look at, and back to my point on the massive US healthcare system, if somebody builds a platform that interconnects everybody from the individual, or say sometimes even call them a patient, all the way up to the clinicians in the health systems, the physicians, the nurses, what have you now have an ability to sell, hopefully, and not everybody's cracked this nut yet, there's a lot of smart people working on it, but I think we'll get there soon. You have an ability to sell actually all over the place. And in the US, you know, health plans control about 50% of the dollars of healthcare, and government, Medicare, Medicaid, control the other half, or okay, call it 1%, just random cash pay. But most of it is controlled by really big entities that have, frankly, trillions of dollars. So which way do you want to go with that? Do you want to be selling just hardware and compete with clone companies that'll pop up, or do you want to try to take a piece of, call it $5 trillion? To get there, you need to be part of it, you know, some kind of ecosystem and have the ability to sell apps and services. I prefer the term services because you really need to be integrated, and we can get more into this in the discussion.
We certainly will.
But I think it's, you know, that's the direction we're going. And all the big companies have talked about this. You know, Samsung's talked about it with Sammy, Apple's talked about it, and others as well.
Picking up on what you said about selling all over the place, we at Gartner obviously see this wearables and the IoT space, wearables being part of the IoT space as a global market opportunity for OEMs and for the entire supply chain involved. So this is a global market opportunity with different types of markets, with different types of segments, and with different types of price sensitivities. So I wanted to ask Justin, coming from the product side, what kind of price sensitivities are you seeing in the overall market space, and can you segment it down into maybe regional market segments the Mika product is probably priced at a very different pricing level, at a different ASP than some of the other wearables. But coming from a product side, what are the price sensitivities on the user?
Yeah, definitely. So we have sales and distribution in 51 countries around the world, so we have some pretty good data on what people look at in different regions of the world. And actually, in a lot of our Asian business, there's kind of this reverse price sensitivity where we see better sales at higher prices. Because our device specifically is one that is very fashionable. There's actually a lot of people that buy our device, don't even put a battery in it, and just wear it around as a fashion statement, right? We saw this discrepancy between sales, and activations, and we're like, what's going on? Does our product have this back door? What's happening? And we learned that people were just wearing the device with no battery. And we said, well, you know, it's an activity tracker. It'll do a lot of cool stuff for you. And so we see this kind of reverse price sensitivity in certain markets where the more expensive the device is, to a certain point, right? If we go above certain thresholds, then obviously it falls off. But there is this kind of idea, this conspicuous consumption, right? Where people say, hey, look, this was this much money and you know that I have this now, right? And I'm wearing this. And so that's one aspect of the world. Obviously, in the United States, there's kind of this early adopter group of people who will pay higher prices for the functionality and all these things. But to really get to that mass market, I think we're going to start to see a lot more devices in the lower price points coming out, because inherently these devices, you know, probably shouldn't say this publicly, are relatively simple, right? A lot of the activity trackers, it's an accelerometer and a Bluetooth chip, right? And so yeah, you got to put money into design and aesthetics, and some are metal and some are plastic, and so there's a little bit of different COGS basis there. But especially as a lot more functionality comes in through iWatches or Apple Watch, whatever they want to call it, and other kinds of smart watches that really have much more functionality, I think we're going to see a lot more price pressure on the more simple devices, which inherently is a good thing, because as was just mentioned, this isn't about selling hardware, right? This is about getting as many people connected to you on a daily basis as you possibly can to learn more about them, and really build out that whole ecosystem and build out those multiple communication points throughout the day.
So would you say the value is not specifically or intrinsic to the hardware that goes into the device, but it comes from the collection of what the hardware delivers, the portal that the hardware delivers to the ecosystem, to the application?
Very much so, very much so. And I use the analogy a lot of, like, look what's happened to computer companies versus Google, right? I mean, there's arguments to be made that all the software companies that serve you software through computers make a lot more money than the computer makers do themselves, right? And so it's a pretty good analogy like that, whereas if you can provide these insights, as has been said on the panel, you know, provide insights about this data, and actually I think there's a big business intelligence engine to be built behind sensors in IoT that hasn't really been tapped yet, but inherently there's a lot of value in that customer engagement. Now, again, we're going to try to make as much money as we can on the hardware for as long as we can, but you know, we have to look at the long term that is going to get eroded away.
Yeah, you're segueing into the next type of questions that I wanted to ask. We at Gartner are vigorously debating internally what that transition is going to be, where the value lies, and show me the money. And Jonathan, you sent me a very nice summary about your version of follow the money, about wearables. Tell us about our bodies and what the health implications are and the health industry implications are, and how value can be derived at the user level, and how this technology can be monetized at the industry level. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so what I mean by follow the money is, and I've alluded to a little bit of it so far, if you look at global numbers, it's pretty staggering. 70% of people die from chronic illnesses. And it's not like it happens like that. Some people can have these illnesses for decades. And it could be hypertension, could be cardiovascular disease, these kind of things. And if you track, if you start looking at their, I'll just call it biometrics, and so that's a body parameter that's being measured by some kind of technology. If you track different kinds of some of the more advanced biometrics, and then if you can figure out how to deliver the insight about that to the clinician, that's what I'm talking about with these ecosystems and ability to monetize services. I already mentioned how big the US healthcare system is. It's measured in the trillions of dollars. That's the money. So you have big companies like Apple, Samsung, and others, Google, trying to figure out, well, how can we use these advanced technologies with, and key point, advanced sensors. I'm not talking about just walking around and counting my steps and my basic heart rate. You need to start getting more sophisticated. I'll give you one specific example. If anybody in this room can figure out how to do blood pressure without using a cuff that squeezes your arm, please call me, okay? You're gonna make $1 billion or more. It's a huge problem, and we've looked at companies that claim they can do this, and we stick our PhD teams on them, and they rake them over the coals, and we figure out that, well, you know, they're kind of like figuring out this kind of body measure using a different measure. They're not directly measuring it, because nobody's figured out this cuff problem. And think about it, do you want to be walking around all day long? And our, by the way, our philosophy is continuous monitoring, 24/7 of the most advanced biometrics about the human body. This has never been done. Okay, how often do people get their blood pressure? Well, you go in, you know, once a year, twice a year, or you might have the device at home and you do, but you're doing it intermittently. Sometimes the doctors we talk to, they have to like think for a second, what would I do with 24/7 data about somebody? Well, their first question is, that's a lot of data, but please filter that for me. So that's what I'm talking about when I say insight and these kind of things.
So is this, in your estimation, a big company play? I mean, healthcare and getting into regulatory stuff like that, that sounds like a very big barrier to entry for small companies or for startup companies.
Yeah, so two things. I think, well, a couple of things. So number one, I think the ecosystems, the platforms, and the classic example, of course, is the Apple App Store. Those are big company plays. But the startups of the world can join those ecosystems on two fronts, at least, and here's the self-plug. Samsung has announced SIM-Band, which is a modular reference design, very advanced smart device, where the startups can build the modules that are, say, the blood pressure module or the glucose module or the whatever, you know, the CO2 module. They can put that in the device. Hopefully it'll also come with some software that delivers insight, because then there's also a cloud platform. And certainly Apple's working on this as well, Google is too. So I think it's both. It's big companies and small companies. Samsung Catalyst Fund, for example, and there are other corporate venture funds that do this as well. We're strategic, we're not financial. We're not saying, hey, startup, make a 10x return. Mm-hmm. What we're saying is, please help us innovate and take your technology and get on to our very large platform, which is Samsung. Okay. That's corporate venture. That's a little bit different perspective than Steve's, and Steve kind of stole a lot of my thunder. He was spot on with a lot of his comments, but we're a little bit different. So I think it's wide open for startups.
Aditya, is this a different perspective? Is this a different view of the market that we're hearing from Jonathan? Because how does style, how does fashion fit into healthcare devices, and why do Jonathan's devices have to be pretty?
So I think there is a recognition that I think so Steve talked about like a backpack computer, right, from the 80s. Can any of us really imagine carrying around that kind of equipment that looks that ugly at any point right now? So if you're talking about wearables for healthcare, if it's too big such that I can't lift my arm because I'm wearing like 2 to 3 pounds on my arm 24 hours a day, and I'm an old person who's very weak, or I'm a young child who needs a lot of help and support, that becomes a problem. If you're someone who is like many people are, like shy about disclosing the fact that they might have a health issue or that they're having monitoring, something that's very obvious and communicates to everybody like, hey, I have this issue, I'm being monitored. That's not something that people are going to be excited about. People want products that fit in with their lives. People want technology that works for them. They don't want to have to work for technology. It should not be a giant leap for someone to say, there's something cool out there. There's something cool out there, and I want to adopt it, but I'm going to change how I live, how I dress, how I interact in order to make that experience happen. And fashion is one component of it. There's all kinds of other things about how society works, how culture works. And at Intel, we have a lot of people, especially people in our labs who are anthropologists who continuously work gathering field data, spending time with users, developing and understanding what's the best and optimal experience that people are looking after to really look for that seamless value add.
Justin, do you agree that the wearables devices have to be an integrated conglomerate of both aspects, ecosystem, value to the user, as well as making a fashion statement and being cosmetically appealing, aesthetically appealing?
Yeah, I mean, we think so. I think, you know, if you look at what's out in the market right now, some of the most popular devices, I wouldn't say are necessarily the most aesthetically appealing right now, but you know, that's just our personal opinion. Other people might think differently. But inherently to do these things, I mean, if you look at hardware devices that have massive adoption, right? Like I'm talking huge, massive adoption. For ease of use, I'll use the iPhone, right? There's a lot of way better phones than the iPhone, right? There's some really good Samsung phones, right? But we look at you know, there's a lot of much better phones than the iPhone. But if you look at massive adoption of one device, right? The iPhone has some huge penetration for one device. And I think some of the reasons is it's like simplistic, right? It has a ton of user case, excuse me, a ton of really good use cases, and it's very aesthetically pleasing. And so there's some of these things that people can do to take a device, and it doesn't, I mean, I love the new Microsoft band, right? I think that's really cool. Microsoft did a really good job because it's very Microsoft, right? It's got everything in it. It's got a magnetometer, it's got a gyro, it's got a GPS, it's got galvanic skin response, right? It's very Microsoft. It's like, here's all the tools you can possibly use. Now go use it and figure out some cool stuff to do with it, right? Where we take kind of the opposite approach. We say we do one thing and we do it really well, right? We make it look beautiful and we make it very useful for people. And so there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. And I think there's room for all of them in the market. I think the people that are going to win in the wearable space are the ones who are able to find that killer use case, right? Because that's exactly what's been said again and again. Who cares how many steps you took today, right? Oh, cool, I took 8,000 yesterday, I took 10,000 tomorrow. What does that mean, right? Do I change my life because of that? You can brag to your friends about it, and that's cool, right? Look, I took 10,000 steps, I'm better than you. Well, awesome, who cares? And so, you know, how to use that information to really feed it back to people and help them do something different, right, is really where stuff's gonna win.
Having a compelling use case is one thing. Creating stickiness and making sure that use case sustains itself over the first couple of weeks or 3 weeks or even 2 months of the life cycle of that product is another thing. How do you as a product company try to make that product stick, and how do you try to keep your consumer engaged with your product?
Yeah, so there's two aspects of it, right? There's a hardware aspect and the software aspect. So the hardware has to be super easy and simple to use, right? And I mean, for example, one of the things that we've done is charging, right? So we don't believe in charging. Our devices last for 6 months plus on a single battery, because you want to remove any barrier to entry that you possibly can to have people use something, right? And removing those barriers is very important. And then on the software side, like you said, making it sticky, right? Bringing people back into the app for something new, something interesting, something innovative, something that they can act on, right, is extremely important. And so I think that these abilities for the software connect to the hardware, it's kind of this unique atmosphere right now where the two are so closely tied together that you have this kind of captive customer that said, hey, if you want to use this device, use this software. Now there's a lot of integrations, right? You have people like MapMyFitness and MyFitnessPal and all these things that you can connect different devices in, and there's all these aggregators. And so it's going to be an interesting game to see how it all plays out of, is it going to be one device to one app, or is there going to be an aggregator that comes together? The Health app from Apple is a great aggregator, but it doesn't tell you anything, right? All it does is give you your data. It's like Passbook, right? It doesn't really turn that data into anything more useful. Hopefully one day it will, but at this point it's still just it might as well be a database of just a whole bunch of stuff in one place.
Do you have any stats about how your users use your product initially and over time?
Yeah, we do. We don't share them publicly necessarily. Sure. Okay. But I can talk for the industry, right? So for the industry, the stats are, you know, less than 30 days, most people fall off. 3 months, or less than 30 days, a lot of people fall off. 30 days, it's like power user, and beyond that, it's pretty hardcore, right? And so we're looking at ways to extend that out. And I think the industry is in general, right? Because we want these devices to be good for folks. And one of the key business models, right, is you need to keep people buying more stuff, right? Because unless you can monetize the data that you get, right? Everyone's like, oh, it's about data, it's about the ecosystem and all these things, but there's not many companies that are actually monetizing that data quite yet, right? So there's all these companies collecting all this data from wearables, but nobody's monetizing it, so the only way to make money right now is in more hardware. So unless you have this repeat year-over-year purchase, you're gonna lose customers pretty quickly.
Let me segue into an area that I think is currently still somewhat of a barrier to the monetization of this big data, or the data that we're collecting. Aditya, you actually alluded to that when you were talking about user preferences and users' inhibitions. Some users don't want to be recognized as using heart rate monitors or fitness devices or things like that. And that leads to the question, and I don't think we can have a discussion on wearables and IoT without addressing concerns about privacy and data security. So first of all, from a hardware perspective, how can we, Apple is a great example for having a super secure and reliable cloud infrastructure from a technical point of view, but as soon as some actresses' nudie pictures get revealed, not due to the fact that the cloud is insecure, but because of the fact that they had weak passwords, the user perception out there is that the infrastructure per se is untrustworthy. From Intel's perspective, what can you, as the provider of the hardware foundation, contribute to make the wearable device, as well as the infrastructure that this data goes into, more secure?
So I think overall as Intel, they're doing a lot of things. We actually, so a couple of years ago we purchased McAfee, and we're now in the process of integrating that into Intel security. So there's really a story about what we can bring from a hardware and a software and like a data center cloud perspective into offering a comprehensive security solution. I'm not an expert on what we're doing in that part of the business right now, but from a wearables perspective, and just in all thinking about privacy as something that we are struggling with in the world today, I think the best is yet to come. So there's a lot of people who have very different understandings of what they think as private information versus what they think as public information. And really, as what all companies should be working towards is allowing users to understand and control their data. So if there's something I want to share, I should be able to share it. If there's something that I don't want to share, I don't have to share it. And what's interesting also to see is that this has kind of been evolving, and you can see people's attitudes on privacy overall evolving, not just from a data perspective, but just in terms of how they engage with other people, which is very important from a wearable side. So I was talking to an architect the other day, and they said that initially everybody was in, and probably a lot of people on this panel included, were in offices where we all had offices and they had a door, and there was a hallway and nobody was kind of like walking around, everybody was kind of in their own separate area. And then we moved to this open office environment, which is very popular here in the Valley. But now people are going back to this concept that no, complete open is not necessarily the preference. Most of their bids they're getting now is like some more degree of privacy. So this is a fluid topic, but from a technology perspective, what we really need to do is be very open with what we can offer and how we can protect data, and then offer users a chance to make the right decisions for themselves.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in on that actually, because you know, connecting the dots back to body parameters that you might collect and then send that over to, you know, into the healthcare system. The second that information, and you know, the lawyers go into all the detail on this, but the second that starts touching clinicians, the healthcare system, there's all kinds of regulations, HIPAA and things like that that apply, so you really have to be sensitive about privacy and, you know, security and these kind of issues. So if you go down the road of thinking about launching a startup about this, you know, you need to start early on talking to somebody about these regulatory issues. FDA is another issue, which is not related to privacy. That's just pure regulation on the kind of the safety side. But you can't go charging guns blazing without considering these things up front.
Let's talk a little bit about the big data that we generate with wearable devices and IoT devices as well, right? So the vision is that we have all these connected devices out there with sensors that monitor whatever physical phenomena happen around our world. And that's being fed into a big cloud that is being hopefully analyzed in a friendly or more valuable.
We hope so. I mean, that's kind of why we're in business here to do that, because we don't want to just sell hardware, right? And so I think there's a couple of things that you can, from a consumer perspective, right? Taking the healthcare standpoint out of it, I mean, predicting disease, identifying all those kinds of things, helping with post-op, that's one area of the world that's extraordinarily interesting, and there's a lot of work being done on that, obviously. But on the other side of the world, from the consumer perspective, I break it down in kind of two key buckets. The first thing you can do is kind of provide insights and coaching, right? And as we call it, it's kind of like the Google Maps for goals. Because so many things today, if somebody says, hey, I want to go run a marathon, right? Then they get this plan. This is, okay, run 5 miles this day, 10 miles that day, 8 miles that day. Well, what if you get the flu or you have to work late, right? And you miss a couple of your workouts? Do you just start back where you were? Do you go do something else? And having this ability to input the data that you actually had without having to write it down and be very active about it, but more passively collect the data and then kind of reroute people towards those end goals is kind of a compelling use case. The market for those things aren't gigantic, right? They're reasonably sized, but they're not huge. So it's an interesting use case, but it's not one that is going to, fulfill that kind of billion-dollar exit there. If you look at the other side of what a lot of these wearable devices and IoT kind of things can do is what I say, build this kind of passive business intelligence engine. So right now, when somebody wants something new, they probably open their computer, go to www.google or www.bing.com, whatever it is, ebay.com, and they type in, I need this pair of red running shoes, right? I ran 300 miles last month, I need this new pair of running shoes. And then Google says, hey, Adidas, Reebok, Nike, I got some person right here looking for running shoes. That's great, right? That's been a very effective business model for Google, but it's very active for the customer, right? The person has to think about what they want, they have to go look for it online, and where they're starting, there's retargeting, but it's all about your activities online, right? It's not about your activities offline, it's all about what you type into that computer. Nobody really knows about you when you're not sitting in front of that screen. And so you can provide insights to customers and to businesses and services, products and services they might want through this more passive operation, right? If you can know somebody ran 300 miles and say, hey, I saw last week in Zappos, you bought this stuff, so do you want these again? Yeah, sure, right? And connecting people with goods and services they want through all this data that you collect about them in their everyday life in a very passive type of method, I think is a pretty compelling use case.
And that's a huge asset that the industry is creating. All of that data that is not only relevant to the users in a fitness application sense, the user's health or the user's activity levels, but also things like location, also things like consumption patterns.
Purchase intent. Correct. Yeah,
exactly. Those are huge assets, valuable assets that are being created. Who owns those? Who monetizes those? Is it the device guy? Is it the Apple Health Kit or Microsoft Health website, or is it Google, or is it some kind of intermediary through whose network the data flows?
It's a good question, and I always look at these kind of models, right? The way I kind of dumb it down, and I always look at the Hearst Corporation really figured this stuff out hundreds of years ago, right? That no new model is really different than newspapers, right? They said, hey, let's give some people some interesting content in the middle and sell on the sides, right? So if they read something about what's going on, whether it was the Civil War or whether it's the 2014 midterm elections, people are going to come look at the middle, and then you hit them with stuff on the sides, right? Same things for Google, same thing for Facebook, same thing for Twitter, right? Give some interesting content and then sell the sides. And so whoever is able to make the most interesting middle, right, with this data is the person that's going to be able to sell the sides. So we're inherently believers that the customer owns the data. If you make the data, you own it, right? We integrate with every single kind of third-party app that there can possibly be. So if somebody wants to use MyFitnessPal instead of our app, go for it, right? You used our device. If our app isn't good enough for you, go use somebody else's, right? But if we can create enough of that awesome, interesting middle content so people keep coming back to our app every day, and we have enough people that the sides are actually valuable, then that's going to be where the monetization happens. So
and Jonathan, is that the kind of company that you would be looking for? Is that a company that sells, that says, hey, I'm developing a killer hardware device, and my monetization strategy, my ROI strategy is to make money off of the delta between the price that I sell it at and what it costs me to produce it? Or is it the kind of company that says, hey, my strategy is to develop a killer hardware device that allows me to tap into monetization aspects or services and apps revenues that are somewhat ancillary in the user's perspective to the app, but to the business model, but that are more core to my revenue strategy?
Yeah, I think it depends. It depends on. I look at the world as, okay, there's going to be some big platforms that come out, and if you assume on the services and apps side, they're going to have some kind of typical rev share, 70-30, whatever it is, something close to that. The hardware side is a little more interesting because you have to, I think, drill down a little bit. Is it just, say, a component? So I talked about this thing called SIM-band. Maybe somebody has this blood pressure thing. You put it in SIM-band, and the end user buys that. There would obviously be some kind of rev share there, but what I would hope is those same hardware people are thinking ahead of the game and saying, you know what, without those interesting algorithms that deliver insight, we're just selling hardware. And everybody knows how tough that business is, right? And so let's assume for a second that that comes along with some algorithms that actually tell somebody something about what their hardware is doing, this insight that we keep referring to. I think that goes into the platform play of, some kind of split on the services business, where the real money's at and the real margin. It's kind of a long discussion. It depends on a lot of the details and the assumptions, but I think it's rev share. Somebody's going to have a platform. Somebody's going to put something innovative on the platform, and there has to be some kind of rev share there. And hopefully, it's kind of uniform and public. So most people in the apps business know if they throw an app up on the app store for Apple, what they're going to make.
In this industry, uniform and public, good luck.
Yeah, I do personally know some exceptions to that. If you get really big and start making a lot of money, everything is negotiable, right? So,
yes, certainly.
But there's some public numbers on some of these platforms.
We've been focusing our discussion very much on the health and fitness and healthcare platforms. But Aditya, you have probably insights into what your customers are implementing into what Galileo platforms, what Edison platforms are being built out for segments and markets other than healthcare. Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, I think we've been really happy with what we've been able to do with the maker community with Galileo and then the pro maker community with Edison. I was just at the Make a Wearable contest that we had in San Francisco earlier, and it was amazing, the numbers, the kinds of things that people were designing and coming up with. There was this one company called Blocks, maybe something similar to what you were talking about. They had designed modules that interconnect together. So one module could be a battery, one module could be GPS, one module could be temperature sensor, and their whole idea is to have an open hardware platform where you can have different companies coming. So say Nike wants to do something specially for fitness and running tracking. They just make a module. They don't have to make a whole wearable for themselves. And then as a user, if I want to go for a long distance run, I swap out some modules, put more batteries in, or if I want to spend more time like measuring my workout, I take out some batteries, I put in a gyroscope or a hydration meter and all those kinds of things. So other people looking at platforms, that was very interesting.
At IDF, I saw drones.
Yeah, so
Galileo platform, drones.
The actual winner for the Make It Wearable competition was this really cool startup called Nixie, where they have built, I don't know if many of you have seen this, it's the year of the selfie stick. You go out and people have this giant stick and they've put their camera or their phone at the end and they're trying to take a selfie from really far away. They've developed this technology that they're working on where there's a drone that sits on your wrist and acts like a watch. You throw it up in the air and it'll hover and take a picture for you. So I think as a platform company, we're really excited to enable the next generation of companies and entrepreneurs because we can't invent the future all of ourselves. I think we're tremendously excited to see some of the crazy ideas that come from the ecosystem.
Jonathan, other than drones, are there any sizable and are there any markets that are comparable to the healthcare market that you see as secondary or tertiary applications of wearables?
Oh gosh, the only thing bigger than healthcare in the US is like military spending, but that's probably on the downturn anyways. But Consistently, I don't think anything's as big as healthcare, other than who knows, oil and gas and stuff. But in the world we live in, if you look up data, something that might be helpful is if you look at data from, say, Rock Health or Start Health, and they publicly put out data about where all the action is. And I actually pulled some of it. And if you look at the top 3 categories, the biggest one is data and analytics. Mm-hmm. And this is for digital health, by the way. So, and again, wearables is a subset of that. Data analytics is really big. A lot of activity around developing services, for clinicians. They call it, I think, digital therapeutics is how they refer to it.
Well, coming from Samsung, with a broad palette, with a broad portfolio, huge portfolio of different consumer products, including home appliances products. What about the home automation?
Oh, yeah, so IoT.
Right?
Yeah, so IoT's big. People, huge, potentially. People define it different ways, which is one of the struggles. I'm trying to figure out one number. It seems like you ask 3 people how big IoT is or what the opportunities are, and you'll get 6 different answers.
Within Gartner, we have more than 6 different answers. That's a whole other story.
Yeah, so you feel my pain when I go to meetings and talk to people about this. So IoT, of course, is huge. I think even Steve mentioned that some people see a lot of this as a subset of that. I would tend to agree. These kind of things can be end nodes. You can look at it that way. Are they going to connect up to some smart hub in the home, for example? Sure, we have startups come in and talk to us about, oh, we have this kind of hub or that kind of hub. And a lot of the pushback there is, how many hubs am I going to have in my home? So who's going to tie that all together? SmartThings was acquired by Samsung. It's very interesting. But you can just check their website and you can see that there's no local processing. Mm-hmm. It's all going up into the cloud. So the question there is, well, is there opportunity for anything that needs to do local processing? And I'm not an expert in home automation, but I could imagine there's some security situations where local processing is important as opposed to pushing everything up into the cloud. It's just, IoT is just so big. It's so many things. Theoretically, Cisco, for example, hopes that it's, everywhere and everything.
Well, for us, the way we looked at the attractive the list of attractiveness of different markets was to list them or categorize them by, first of all, market size, obviously the market opportunity, the TAM opportunity, but secondly, how much value can you extract from it? How efficient or how inefficient are these markets? The more inefficient these markets are, the more opportunity you have to create value, to extract surplus from it. And home automation is something that came up in that context.
I think manufacturing is also like a really interesting space. I saw this company called ProGlove where you talk about people who are line workers making cars, for example. You can imagine like a BMW or a high-tech Tesla factory, and every minute you can shave off in that process, or every few seconds you can shave off, is thousands of dollars. And you think about how many cars they're putting out at any given point of time, there's a tremendous opportunity for companies to think about how to improve that process, how to make it safer, more efficient. The industry and the heavy industrial space has always been very friendly to automation and connected technology, going all the way back into the 90s with SCADA systems. So I think there's some good potential there as another vertical option.
I'm getting my Tesla delivered in December, and I'm getting a factory tour in Fremont. I am so looking forward to that. So in the interest of time, just moving along a little bit and looking into the future and looking into our crystal balls and looking into our future gadget devices. Where are wearables going? Are they staying wrist-worn? Are they staying at the wrist? Or other parts of the body? Or other form factors? What is your expectation of, and Justin, I don't want you to go into product roadmaps, but just philosophically, Justin, where do you think it's going?
Yeah, but I think the wrist is a very competitive space, right? I mean, even I work for the company, I have two things. I have my watch, right, and my life keeping, and then I have my wearable device that I use for other things. And I think it's very difficult to replace the heritage that watches inherently have built, right? I mean, it's a very fashion forward, it's very sentimental. There's a lot of things that watches provide that a lot of other companies aren't providing, right, in their wearable devices. And there's also, the wrist is a good place because you can get some interesting biosignals as far as movement, heart rate, other things like this. but it's maybe not the most useful wearing position, right? If you have to put something else on your wrist, it's there, it gets, you know, jostled, can you wear it all the time, things like that. And so I think there's a lot of really different places that you'd be able to put wearables. Again, we can't talk about our product roadmap, but you know, you see people coming out with all kinds of crazy stuff. There's sensor embedded t-shirts, there's things you wear, you know, there's, I think actually Intel recently came out with headphones with heart rate monitors in them, right?
Yep.
With some musician, I forget who.
50 Cent.
50 Cent, that's right. Yeah.
Only the best.
Yeah.
If you ask me, you're using that term musician in a very broad sense, but that's all.
And so there's a lot of different places that you can get a lot of biometric signals. And so I think what it comes down to is cost, right? Cost of the actual device. Can you make like a throwaway one, right? That can be in every single person's t-shirt, or can you make tattoos, right? There's a cool company called MC10 that has these kind of tattoo level sensors that you can put on there. So it comes down to cost and battery life, and there's all these different technology curves that are all kind of happening at the same time that will all lead into what that kind of winning
Jonathan, do you see anything
be.
more invasive, like implantables in the healthcare space?
Yes, we've seen them, but you know, our history is we're consumer electronics, so we're not, you know, medical device company. I know, you know, Steve mentioned, you know, the contact lens, and he showed some Borg-like picture with something in their head. I'm sure there are teams that are working on that, but right from the get-go, they're going to be FDA regulated, and that's the world of call it medical scientists. You know, how far in the future do you want to go when you start seeing those things? I'm sure they'll come to our, you know, human race at some point. The question is how soon, how much will they cost? But once you start putting things in the human body, not only are you regulated, but then you have to wonder, is this immediately some kind of medically driven thing? So do we need to involve the physicians and the PhDs from the biological sciences in terms of productizing, creating services, these kind of things. One thing I'll say about just taking a step back on you know, this wrist location, our philosophy is we don't know. There's all kinds of interesting companies that are doing, you know, things in the helmets. There's the earbuds. There's companies that are doing, you know, bed sheet kind of covers. They're picking up body signals from that. We're seeing scales that are doing more interesting things than just weight and the CO2 in the room. So our philosophy is we think it's all interesting. Because if you think of a platform, theoretically it should be pulling in data from anything. For physiological reasons, the wrist is actually very challenging. So we've talked to a lot of you know, the MD, PhD types. So for example, back to that blood pressure example, really tough to do from the wrist. And so I think it remains to be seen what is fashionable, what do people want to wear, and then cross-reference that with what kind of biometrics can we get. You can get a lot of interesting things from, say, the neck, but if you have a necklace, for example, that's too far down, not going to work so well. Maybe it has to be higher up. The head is actually a wonderful location for all kinds of biometrics, but who wants to wear a helmet or some kind of Borg thing all the time? You know, remains to be seen.
Aditya, what's your view of the future?
So I think there's two really interesting points to me about this. The first thing is that if you look at just say pure technology, so there was a form factor everybody desktop. There was a form factor everybody sort of came around to for the laptop, and then for the cell phone, right? Everybody's got like you know, a standard size phone with a touchscreen. Like everybody kind of aligned to that. I don't see that happening in the wearable space. There's not going to be one form factor that does it all. There's going to be an entire ecosystem and a number of different options. And the other thing is to think about as far as things that you want to wear. What is the customer's interest in wearing the same device day in and day out in the future, right? Or is it going to be something like where you walk into your closet and you have half a dozen shirts, you know, a couple of different bracelets and watches, and they all have mix and match features, and it doesn't matter which one of those I wear, the devices and the technologies know what I'm wearing and what I need at that point of time, so I don't have to make a choice. I can just live my life and technology just blends in very seamlessly.
Well, the nice thing about the future is we're all going to come back 1 year from now and we will reflect upon what we discussed today, and we will find that we were all wrong. So with that, I think we should take a few questions from the audience. Gentleman over here.
A quick question on so we heard about some good applications on medical and about the form factors, but in terms of applications in social media and peer-to-peer like Uber, Airbnb, what can be done with wearables other than medical and form factors? I mean, for peer-to-peer.
Yes, that goes back to the question of what other industries are in could be seen for wearables, but I think your question is also going into a little bit IoT, not something that is specific to be worn or to be carried around by the human. But any ideas?
There's a pretty cool company called Bionim out of Canada. They just launched a pilot with the Royal Bank of Canada, and they have a little ECG sensor that you can wear, and they've actually developed a very reliable identification protocol from your heart rate. And so they're using that to identify folks for payments. And so there's a lot of different things you can do, and this comes into the security aspect of it as well, where the wearables can make you the password, right? There's this whole new wave of things of saying you are the password through biometric sensors. Obviously, Apple has their thumbprint reader.
And we hear that from Intel as well.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of different things you can do in identity and payments and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Any more questions?
Yeah, we have one from the gentleman in the red. Okay.
Very interesting discussion. It was riveting. Pretty interesting, especially from a fashion standpoint. And I also I think a lot of y'all alluded to the fact that not everybody will be wanting to monitor the same thing, and that not everybody will be wanting to monitor the same thing every day. And yet there are so many different sensors measuring so many different things. So I can't see myself wearing like 10 bands and things. So is there from a fashion sense of point of view, the women came up with this Pandora bracelet and charms, right? Like 10 different charms, and people can customize the charms to what they need. Is there an equivalent in the wearable technologies, like the modules that you talked? There's one band that does all the software and everything, and then you just plug in the charms that you want for that particular day.
No, Justin will want you to wear a Misfit every day and nothing else. Is that right?
No, I mean, we encourage multiple devices, and I think you mentioned a device that actually does that, right, at the Maker Faire?
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing with wearables that I keep coming back to is that nobody has necessarily solved the space. The best is yet to come, and just speaking about kind of from a fashion perspective, when we talk to people who work in that industry, they're very design forward, like design thinking. Like for them, the design is the king, and they have to come up with new designs and new styles, and it's a very fast-moving and advanced industry in its own right. And
but we're not really seeing interoperability happening, right? So I wear my Garmin today and my Fitbit tomorrow, and everything gets fed into the same ecosystem. That's not going to happen, right?
It will with the platform that we're announcing.
So watch this space.
Solving the cuff problem, essentially I think Star Trek and that group had it right. You just wear uniforms, and I think Steve Jobs did that, and Mark Zuckerberg does that, and I think, why should I have to worry about what I'm wearing to work? If you're wearing that one smart device or whatever that you're wearing, and that would have in it the cuff already built in, or any other monitors that you want to monitor your
Talk to Jonathan about funding that idea.
I'm sure somebody's thought of it already.
All right, we have another question to your left.
Hey guys, so what I want to ask you is, how exactly do you see wearables going or progressing in lower income markets? Because, I mean, in my humble opinion, right now they're still very much luxury items, right? So like a $70 fitness tracker is great for us Californian, Bay Area living Prius driving guys, but it's completely out of the picture for somebody super poor in, India or something. So
let me make a very radical statement. One of the typical cyclical Gartner products is something called Gartner Predicts, where every year our analysts come together and we make very radical predictions about the future. One of my colleagues said that by 2017, 50% of the wearables will be available at $0 cost. Very, very provocative statement, right? Do I hear dissent?
Not in the least. I mean, we agree wholeheartedly. I mean, even Xiaomi out of China, right? This gigantic Chinese cell phone and consumer electronics company, they have an activity tracker for $13. Right, and it's just going to go down from there. I mean, their business model is to sell stuff pretty much at cost. They have a lot of cheap things, not cheap things, they have a lot of inexpensive things. They have nice products that are low cost. But again, their business model is monetize what you can do with it, right? So inherently, I couldn't.
And just to explain that, this is not my prediction, it's a colleague's prediction, but the way he justified it was, the underlying assumption was that these products are being produced at a very low cost, as Justin said, but number two, they're being subsidized, just like our phones are being subsidized today, they're being subsidized by ecosystem partners. And in this particular case, it's the Alibabas of this world, the shopping portals of this world that leverage the valuable asset in the form that comes back in the form of the user data and subsidizes the portal devices that delivers that user data. So that's a trend that we're seeing specifically in emerging markets. Again, let's get together a year from now, 2 years from now, and see if that prediction was right.
All right, another question to your left.
Hi, good morning. I'm Meg Moudet. I've been in this market, which is the wearables, ambulatory medical devices, wearable devices, since I was a grad student. I've seen it from remote drug dispensers as VP of a product for a company that was a rival to Fitbit. So seen the full stack at the bottom and the top. I'm hearing a lot of stuff. This past week there were 3 conferences on wearables, IoT, and mobile devices related to the wearables market. The one question it seems that no one has come up with an answer for, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on, is what will be the data and ecosystem standard for how interoperability works, and how will the use cases be scoped, defined, and deliver for horizontal, sometimes high margin or low margin markets, such as elderly care or developing world education applications or a clinical trial for a vaccine, something like that, in addition to the IoT home space. So again, 2 pieces to this question. How will the data ecosystem look, and what is the interoperability platform that you envisage coming out of this? Thanks.
So another interoperability question, this time on the back end rather than on the front end.
Yeah, I mean, this is the world I'm living in. So it's easy, the platform should be open. Any kind of partner should be able to come in, use APIs to upload their data, bring in data down from whatever the platform is, and then be able to monetize and share with the platform owner in some kind of rev share arrangement. And you talk about, is it elderly care? Is it on this side of healthcare? That side? Is it just simple wellness and it doesn't even touch the healthcare system? That's up to the startup or the partner to figure out what they want to do and figure out how to monetize. The existing platforms today, they don't help you figure out your business model and how you're going to monetize. They just set up the platform and they do a rev share.
All right, we have another question right in front of you.
Hello. So the question that I have is, how do you see wearables shaping culture and vice versa? And if you have examples for both of those cases.
I hope they bring our heads from this position, right? Which is lots of times you see on the bus or on the Caltrain or sometimes in cars, right? Everybody's down looking at their phones and things. So hopefully more of the head up position, right? That's what I'd like to see, that they can do.
Yeah, I think like Justin said, wearables have a tremendous potential to take us away from screens. So somehow we've gotten to the position where our interface into data is screens and our interface to get information from data is a screen. And we've said, that's it. I think there's
So are we going back to actual person-to-person interaction?
Well,
Heaven forbid.
Heaven forbid. That's pretty scary.
It's a good question.
But I think you will see that, and then you'll move away from this concept of hopefully having to figure out what data you want when and what is important to you. So now we all have our phones and we get notifications all the time. Like my pocket is buzzing, I have a message, maybe there's a certain news piece I'm waiting to hear break, or if there's a certain photo or something that I'm looking for, if my technology knows what I need at what time, I only get interrupted when I need to be. And every time, every other occasion, I can just be in the moment and be comfortable that I'm not missing anything. I think wearables can kind of deliver on that vision.
Yeah, I keep returning to this topic, and it's partly because I'm living it every day, but also I used to be a healthcare guy before I joined the high-tech ranks. I hope that it changes our culture in terms of some data at the beginning about the chronic illness, but it's pretty staggering and frankly almost depressing for people that have to see the data every day on how poorly on average, not only Americans but even in other countries, things are not good. I read something that at first was amusing, but then I realized it was really sad the other day. Has anybody seen these videos of the crash? They put the test dummies in whatever car and they crash it up against the wall, and there's all kinds of standards. They actually, and think about this for a second, they actually had to make the test dummies bigger because they didn't represent the average American. That has huge healthcare implications. I know it's funny at first, but then you start thinking about the cost and the morbidity and the mortality for people. People, yes, we're living longer. That's awesome. Are we living longer well? For a lot of people, for millions of people, the answer is no. And if we can change that aspect of our culture, we're more fit, we're eating better, you know, all these kind of things, then, you know, like a lot of startups say, oh, we're changing the world. Well, you know, when it comes to this stuff, please change the world. And part of that is culture.
Do we have time for?
All right, we have time. I think we are nearing the end of the segment. I'll have last three questions. Three questions, please.
Hi, thanks for sharing your thoughts, quite interesting. Healthcare industry is quite complex with a number of players, you know, doctors, nurses, regulation, and quite a few other things. I'm not sure if a doctor with a license to practice in one state can practice in another state. With cloud, you can, you know, remotely, you know, provide, you know, advice and things like that. So, do you see the regulation, the laws side of it changing to accommodate this trend? That's one. And the second part of it is currently one of the issues is the accuracy of the data that's gathered through these wearable devices. For example, the clinical data is, you know, much more accurate. And do you see that changing?
Yeah, great question. So the answer on the regulatory side is surprisingly yes, in a sense they have modified. So the FDA recently just put out some information about mobile apps. Which, you know, people hear FDA and they get kind of scared and stuff, and we've thought about this very carefully. We're not charging into the medical device industry in the sense that, oh, now there's going to be a Samsung pacemaker or a Samsung CAT scan machine, or that's kind of the heavy duty end. But when it comes to the consumer world, the FDA has said certain things where, you know, I'm not a regulatory lawyer, but they have shied away from regulating mobile apps. And one of the parallel there is, think about the computer in the doctor's room when you go in to see the doctor. That computer has all kinds of healthcare information and data passing through it. That's not regulated. The FDA has chosen not to do that. They're regulating the actual devices that are taking the scan, which is related to your second question. And this is what I would plead to the people that want to go build startups around this. Please get your readings, your data, whatever you're doing, validated. One of the big struggles now is I have 3 or 4 different devices, and guess what? They all tell me I have a different heart rate. They all tell me I have different number of steps. Really? Like, figure that out. Go get it validated. And you know, we've announced, for example, we have a validation partnership with UCSF, and I think this will be the trend that you'll start seeing different medical centers and institutions working with technology partners to validate the clinical relevance of these different technologies. Because if you don't do that, guess what? The doctors aren't going to touch it. And they're the gatekeeper, right? They control trillions of dollars of spend. And if it's not validated, they're not going to care.
So one point on our side, we a lot of the folks in my company came from a hardcore medical device company. We made glucose meters. We actually made the first glucose meter that connects to the iPhone. So it was all regulated. very heavily, and obviously our devices right now are not, right? I mean, as you mentioned, our step counter will tell you something different than somebody else's steps. We have several white papers that indicate ours are better, but you know, that's a different story. But it's still not FDA approved. It's, you know, it's our own white paper, whatever it is. But I think in general, right, as far as regulation goes, is that technology on its own can't fix dumb regulations, right? And what can fix dumb regulations is scale. And two examples of this are Uber and Tesla right now, right? There are some stupid regulations out there, some dumb lawmakers that have said, hey, Uber can't exist in this, you know, region because we want to protect the taxi drivers. Seriously, right? And hey, you know, Tesla can't sell directly to customers here. Come on, how is that better for the customer, right? And so I think as we see this generational shift in healthcare data, right, which we're seeing right now, and people are sharing all kinds of crazy stuff, and more generations are more open with sharing data. And if you look at online banking, right, I mean, I'm much more concerned about somebody getting access to my bank account than I could ever hope to care about them getting access to my healthcare data, right? So what we've seen inherently is that everybody uses online banking, right? But we know from Home Depot and Target and a whole bunch of other hacks that it is inherently unsafe, it's inherently unsecure, but yet it provides enough value for us that we're willing to put it out there. And so I think as people start to show what the value of reducing FDA regulations, right? It's a tricky balance because there are things where it can be harmful to people. We don't want that to happen. But we want to allow people to get as much information and be stewards of their own information as they can be. 23andMe is a perfect example, right? Information to somebody, no, you can't have that, sorry, because you didn't play nicely with the FDA. And so I think one of the cool things that a lot of companies can do is build enough war chests and get enough scale that they have the ability to actually influence Washington. And I think that's one of the aspects that Silicon Valley needs to grow more into, is to develop better relationships with regulators, right? Because so many of our newest innovations and newest technologies are just going to be fighting hands over fists as we try to solve these real problems, right? As we get out of online advertising, we go into healthcare, we go into transportation, we go into all these different massive things that there's so much money feeding back into the regulators. And, you know, I'm not trying to say the government's corrupt, but, you know, people can take what they will from the stories you see.
Is there a trade-off between accuracy of the reading, cost, and consequence of misreading? So in Class A devices, if something goes wrong in your defibrillator, can't even say it, that has severe consequences, right? If something goes wrong in your glucose meter on your daily readings,
it can actually,
Class 3
right?
type of device.
Yeah, I mean, and glucose meters are a good example, because if you get the wrong information and you inject yourself with insulin based on that wrong information, you can kill yourself. Changing impact, hands down FDA approved, right? But if it's an EKG on the back of your phone to kind of look at your heart rate and thing, your heart variability, like, you can't really do much with that information. If you're going to self-medicate yourself with heart medicine, different story, right? But the medicine should be the controlled aspect, not the information.
All right, interesting conversation. We'll take one last question. I'm sorry. Okay, two questions. Two short questions, short answers. One at the at the back wall, please.
You've pretty much answered a lot of my questions, so I'll just elaborate a little bit more. So if I make a device that can measure 15 biomarkers, and someone later comes along, and I make that data open, and someone later comes along and writes an app that makes a health claim, and those 15 markers for me were a fitness or a sports performance sort of application, but then someone writes an app that sort of makes a health claim that puts it into a different space. So you're saying that if I would validate those biomarkers first and make sure that they're accurate, FDA wouldn't mind if someone starts to make, you know, different claims on their app that isn't necessarily FDA approved, or someone makes an app and a user makes a bad decision based on what the app told them, you know, where does that?
I think there's a difference. I don't know. There might be. I think there's a quote somewhere like a little knowledge can be a bad thing sometimes. So, for example, you could give me data on the foundation of this building and the different structural strains, and give me all the data, and then ask me, do I think this building is solid? I'll be like, I don't know, I'm not a civil engineer. So I think there's a place in terms of making sure that the insights are provided by the right people, and there's different levels, right? Like, I think there's a lot of benefit, as you know, my fellow panelists have talked about, in terms of giving people that wellness information and that data, but I don't know, you could probably speak better about this, but if you get into the territory where you're making expert claims, and if you're not an expert, I think that can be kind of tricky.
And what's the liability associated with that? Right? Is the liability on the hardware guy who's probably not a medical professional, or is the liability lie with the medical professional that comes up with a diagnosis based on poor data?
Well, it's going to depend if you're in the, clinicians are always subject to some kind of liability. That's just medical liability, because they're making decisions and they're, treating people and giving medication. So that's well known. On the hardware side, it's back to the validation, and then if you fall into a regulatory category, and again, I don't think, there's no FDA lawyers in here, I think, but if you're going to be telling people something about their body that the FDA says, yes, that's regulated, that device maker or hardware maker has to comply. People forget that the federal government has these people called U.S. Marshals. They can show up and shut your business down if you decide not to comply. How Uber's escaped this, I have no idea. Your question depends on a lot of things. I think you mentioned the word open. So if I have data and it goes to an open platform, and then somebody else uses that data, that's really interesting. I don't think the platform is going to be regulated or liable. It's probably, okay, now I take that data, well, am I another device maker or hardware maker, or am I just a services provider? I think it's a lot of depends in there. But in that scenario, I think somebody's going to get regulated.
Just to add to
All right, Maggie.
I just wanted to add something what Jonathan said, because I am from the pharmaceutical and medical device industry. I work with FDA regulatory people almost daily basis. So to answer to your questions, in general, FDA regulation for medical devices and pharmas, they have a very, very different regulations for each type of device. They classify the device into various types, class 1, class 2, class 3, class A, 3A, 3B, and all those kind of things and the regulations for everything. For example, I am a company, I want to make a latex glove. That's a class 3 medical device. It is considered as a medical device, but what are they going to approve for that? Just look at the latex quality and go for it, Versus if I'm collecting a data for a patient for a device which is class 1 or class 2, there are different regulations. It goes through a different process. Another thing is that as terms of data is concerned, any software which has been used in the healthcare industry has to go through HIPAA compliance, and it has to be approved by HIPAA policies that it's going to keep the integrity of the data, if that helps.
All right, we have one last question over here to your left.
So just looking at markets that don't have such regulatory limitations, I'm curious if has anyone saw the pain point in the pet wearables market for your lost pet? Is there a market for pet wearables?
For pet wearables?
Yeah, non-human wearables. I mean, for scientific research, pet tracking. I mean, just
I think people love their pets, and people who have pets are willing to spend lots of time and love and attention and money on that. And so, I think there is an opportunity for the right company.
Yeah, I would just say, sure, there's a market for it, but it's going to be rapidly commoditized, so raise a lot of marketing dollars to compete with your competitors. Pretty simple, right? GPS chip.
Already to your left and left again.
Hi, this is an interesting discussion about fashion and more say healthcare. And my thoughts actually going towards education. I'm a UX designer, and I love to see wearables being implemented in the education system in the future. And I wanted to know your thoughts of what trends and opportunities do you see wearables becoming part of education system in the future? Wearables for children, habit forming. What are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
I think there's I heard a clip on NPR Marketplace the other day about this topic. There's a lot of privacy concerns. Because if you start collecting data about children, Obviously, it makes the parents nervous. Where does that data go? I think there's some new regulation. I'm no expert in this. Samsung is, out of the many businesses we have, at least outside of Korea, I don't think education is one of them. But I think the big hurdle is what's the privacy environment?
But I think that question also points back to the cultural changes that we may or may not see. Probably may see because at the end of the day, if this proliferates, if this is a wave, the kids will accept it, and the kids.
Oh, the kids think it's great.
And I actually think those last two questions are somewhat related because you bought a GPS tracker for your dog. The same technology you probably buy your kid, right? So I think
I'm wanting to something more than just where it is my child. That I think we could solve that pretty quickly. But if you start looking at more advanced data, like here's one, if we think about sensor fusion. What's my child's activity level during the day, and how does that correlate with
big data conference last year.
and what this report I heard Steve was saying is, well, if you start collecting data on the performance of exams, and that goes into some database, talking about control of your data, where does that go? Who's that going to? Is that going to influence my kid going to college 20 years later? I'm going to shut that down in 2 seconds. I got 2 kids. I'm going to shut that down in 2 seconds.
I'm not an expert on this topic matter because I'm a pet owner, but I'm not a dad. My assertion is, or my prediction is, if it's something cool that the kid or the teen, especially the teenager, is going to want to wear, that's going to be the use case. That's going to make that product proliferate. That's going to make the product successful. Right? And so that would be my first barrier to entry, is to make it cool for the kid and make the statement, make it an aspirational product.
But it's not mature enough.
Again, I'm not a dad. I don't know what's cool, but I'm just saying, make it cool, make it acceptable.
Yeah, I'm just worried about
as a
what
moderator.
That's because you're a parent.
Yeah.
But there would be a massive, keep that data captive to make sure it doesn't put it in it. The childhood obesity thing is huge. The Boys and Girls Club has a gigantic push right now on wearables for kids, trying to help parents understand how active they should have been each day, because it's such an issue throughout school. In the United States, especially, right? So getting distracted, if we can pull the data out at the time being and say, hey, look, this thing is just a daily number, it doesn't have any kind of connectivity. It's a really interesting.
All right, folks, that was an extremely informative, engaging and sometimes contentious panel discussion. I'd like to thank Justin, Jonathan, Aditi, and Werner for that. And you guys would like to give it up for